Hey y'all, Zach McDonald, your real estate agent with Real Property Associates, and this is my Seattle real estate market update for October 2025. All right, everyone, I'm excited about the fall and October here in Seattle, but I'm more excited right now because my Seattle Mariners are in the playoffs and they won the American League West. And I don't know if that means anything to you if you're a baseball fan, but for me, growing up here in Seattle as a baseball fan, it's been a really, really tough life. The Mariners have consistently missed the playoffs, and only one time in the last 24 years, a couple years back, even snuck into the playoffs. But this is the first time the Mariners have won their division since 2001. And back in 2001, the Mariners set or tied the record for the most wins in a season, 116 games, but they did not manage to even make the World Series. In fact, they're the only team that has never made a World Series appearance. And there's high hopes right now this year that we can do that, but we still have to beat a few teams to get there. I was thinking, though, it'd be fun to look back and see what home prices were like when the Mariners made the playoffs last before we get too serious here about the numbers. Sometimes we got to have a little fun. So back in September 2001, the median sales price in King County, are you ready for this? $247,975. Okay, that was the median sales price in 2001 in King County. The median sales price in King County now, $975,000 was the median sales price last month. And if we look at the average is even wilder. The average price, $303,483 back in 2001. Okay, not a huge jump from the median. The average sales price last month in King County, 24 years later, $1,255,002. Okay, wild, huge jump in the values over the last 24 years. All right, let's get serious here now. We had a little bit of fun. Everybody's been talking about the Mariners here in Seattle. It's October. It's time for baseball playoffs, and it's also time for the housing market to start winding down a little bit here for the fall. So as baseball's ramping up and everybody's getting excited, if you're a baseball fan, the housing market typically does the opposite thing. We start to see fewer houses coming on the market, and we start to see the buyer activity slow a tiny bit, but you also start to see all these new buyers joining the market. And so what we see is the amount of houses on the market starts to dwindle. And then when we hit the early spring market, late winter market, we tend to have some competition. And right now we've seen a little bit of competition picking up across King and Snohomish County, but we're also seeing that there's been enough housing inventory on the market to keep the market more balanced. And I think that's what buyers and sellers ultimately want in a sale. Sellers, of course, would like it to be a little bit more in their favor, but a balanced market is really a more equitable market for the negotiations. Now let's talk about mortgage rates here real quick, and then we'll talk about the stats. So mortgage rates have been down over the past month and a half, at least been trending down. Mortgage rates, according to Mortgage News Daily, as of 10/7, 6.38%. And this number has been relatively consistent over the past couple weeks. If you follow along with the regular weekly videos, the rates did dip a little bit closer to 6 a few weeks back, and then the Fed dropped the rate, and mortgage rates went up. And I don't want to spend much time on that, but the mortgage rates have been trending down. I think they'll continue to trend down overall. We're also seeing that the government's been buying mortgage-backed securities again, right? And that helps bring down the mortgage rates. But we're going to see, I would assume, and a lot of people that I follow think that we're going to start to see the mortgage rates keep creeping down, and that will help stimulate the housing market. It would be nice, I think, for a lot of people that got a 7% rate. I have a 6.99% rate on my current home. It'd be nice to be able to refinance that. I'm not trying to do that, though, until I get closer to 6 or maybe even below 6, maybe 1%. I like to see 1%. I think 0.75 might make sense too, depending on how long you're planning to keep that rate. But I think it's almost refinance territory, and especially if you got your rate a couple years ago. And I think we'll start to see and hopefully see these rates trend down into the mid fives, upper fives at some point here, not too distant future. Okay, median sales price. We had our fun. $960 in Seattle last month, which is 2.8% up year over year, slightly more than the King County median sales price increase. Bellevue, though, down year over year, 2.7%, about the same amount opposite of the King County number. So King County was up a little more than 2% on the median number. Bellevue, a little bit below that, 1,761,000. And we're seeing that, the prices in Seattle and Bellevue tends to have more ups and downs throughout the year. Bellevue's median sales price just kind of does this on the graph. And there are certainly some houses in Bellevue and locations that might have a few listings that would, in my opinion, skew these numbers a tiny bit more on the average side maybe than the median. But Bellevue is just like constantly like this, with Seattle being a little bit more consistent with the trend lines. But it is not abnormal here to see the bumps, I guess, for Bellevue that we're seeing. Now, if we look back at the median sales price over the past couple years, we're seeing a trend upwards from a couple years back when Bellevue's median sales price was down around 1,660,000. Seattle was at 896 a few years back. So we've been seeing that trend up. Not much of a change here if we look back over the past year. And that's been the trend across King County and also Snohomish County, that the market has been relatively flat for the year with some ups and downs in the spring. Now, the average percent of list price in Seattle, just above asking price, 0.2% above asking price. And Bellevue saw 98.4% of the asking price. So in both cases, not as much competition as last year, not as much over the asking price, or not as big of a percentage of the asking price. If we look at the average percent of the original list price, so this is the number I think more accurate for what we want to talk about and capture, is that there are price reductions right now. We're seeing plenty of them. And so if we look at that number, we're seeing 98.9% of the original list price in Seattle, and then 96.6% of the original list price in Bellevue. And so I think that number a little bit more accurately captures the price reductions baked into that. And then afterwards, right, it's like almost like every house is having a price reduction, or every other house is having a price reduction. We're seeing a lot across King County and across Snohomish County. Still selling relatively close, but if you're a buyer, I think that's a good expectation that if the house is not selling in a couple weeks, you're probably getting a little bit of a discount from that original listing price. And I think for sellers, the expectation would be, pricing your house maybe a little bit more competitively to start, so you're not the person dropping the price. You end up usually getting less that way than you do if you come out of the gates with a price that people want. Maybe they compete, because we're seeing competition too. We are seeing multiple offers and houses going over asking price, but that's not the case when the house pushes the price from the start. Now, days on market, 14 in Seattle and 17 in Bellevue is the median, right? And that takes out those outliers. I think that's probably the best number to consider when you're thinking about it. But the other number here, average days on market, 28 in Seattle and 28 in Bellevue, a little bit of a delta there. It does take into account, though, those outliers, right? The super fast ones and the super slow ones. I like the median number for the days on market just because I think it captures the true days on market number a little bit better. Now, new listings, lots of new listings in Seattle. In fact, 25.3% more than last year. Bellevue saw 33.9% more than last year. It is normal to see a bump in new listings from August to September, and that's what we saw here. It is normal to see this last final push before there's literally like a cliff in the new listings. October is usually a slight drop off from September, and then it just falls off in November and December, and we're really nearing that number right now. The pending sales, that's the last big one I want to talk about before we just kind of wrap up with inventory. And I always think that's one of the big numbers to pay attention to. saving it for the end, by the way. But the pending sales are up 5.5% in Seattle year over year. And that's not quite keeping up with the amount of new listings. Bellevue, though, 44.9% more pending sales. And so these are all sales that are going to close next month, right? The closed sales number is okay, but it doesn't really reflect what's happening right now. It reflects a few months ago when those sales would have gone pending most likely. So now what do we got? We got homes for sale in the Seattle and Bellevue area. And in both cases, we have quite a bit more houses available on the market than we did at the same time last year. We've seen that trend here for months now where more people are putting their houses on the market. We're seeing numbers that are even above what would have been maybe a normal amount of housing inventory or houses coming on the market. And that's why we're seeing bigger supply numbers. So Seattle, 2.8 months of supply. The number last month was 2.6. Bellevue is at 2.6 months of supply. And they were likewise at 2.8 last month, right? So they were flipped with Seattle. And in both cases, though, a healthy amount of supply, not anything super high, not anything super low, a little bit more of a balanced market in both cases. And that's why we're not seeing the prices just jumping up. And that's also why we're not seeing the prices dropping a ton. Bellevue and Seattle both have opportunity for buyers. And I think King and Snohomish County as a whole, right, is a place right now where you can, as a buyer, find something that's been on the market for a little while and maybe negotiate a little bit with the seller on the price or the terms. And I think that we're going to see over the next couple months normal patterns. And that means that we're going to see a lot fewer houses coming on the market. And that means that buyers, you have a lot less opportunities available to you, and there will be a lot more competition as we're nearing the spring housing market. So my prediction is that this next month or two is kind of the golden window for buyers. I would almost look at it as the beginning of 2026. If you want to get started early, I think for this spring housing market, if you're going to jump into that market next year, if interest rates keep coming down like we're seeing, and if the amount of inventory dwindles, which it normally does, we might have a fairly competitive spring housing market. It might be surprising to a lot of people, and I'm just going to talk about it now. The spring market is normally a little more competitive, and it has been even with the ups and downs of the market over the past few years, and I would expect 2026 to be nothing different. So if your goal is to buy a house, you want to plant some roots here in the Seattle area, I would consider doing that earlier than waiting until everybody else jumps into the game. Thanks so much for watching this month's Seattle real estate market update. I appreciate and value your attention. And if you made it to the end of this video, I know it was valuable for you. So please consider subscribing so you can follow along on a regular basis. And if there's any way that I can bring value to your situation, maybe you're thinking about buying a house, maybe you're thinking about selling a house here in the greater Seattle area, I'd love to connect.